In the ancient kingdom of Umuadiri, where red earth carried the footsteps of kings and palace walls guarded secrets older than memory, a silent crisis was unfolding. Prince Chidibere Nwokeanyi, the wounded heir to the throne, wore royalty with grace. But beneath the crown lived a shame no healer had been able to cure. While elders feared for the future of the kingdom, and whispers began to spread beyond the palace, far away in humble Amanko hamlet. A poor village cook named Adaora Okafor rose each morning with nothing but dignity, skill, and a heart untouched by ambition. Neither of them knew that fate had already begun its work, leading a broken prince and a humble woman toward a love that would challenge tradition, heal hidden pain, and force a kingdom to choose between pride and truth. Morning light spread over Obi Umwadiri, touching its carved pillars, red earth courtyards, and ancient walls with quiet gold. From outside, the palace looked unshaken. Inside, fear was growing. In the Eni Ichi council hall, the elders of Umwadiri sat in a solemn circle, their red caps and ivory staffs marking the weight of tradition. Before them stood Prince Chidibere Nwokeanyi, tall, dark-skinned, and regal in a rich Isiagu robe. He looked every inch a future king. Only those in the room knew how fragile that image truly was. Ichi Matubogu, the oldest elder, broke the silence. "Your Highness, the throne cannot continue in uncertainty. The kingdom has no heir. The people will soon begin to ask questions." Chidibere said nothing. He had heard many versions of the same warning. Herbalists had failed. Healers had failed. Every hidden attempt to solve his private condition had ended in deeper shame. In a kingdom where manhood and kingship were tied to legacy, his pain had become more than personal. It had become a matter of the crown. Another elder cleared his throat. "The alliance with the Eze family still stands. Lady Ifunanya Eze is ready. The Queen Mother has been patient. But patience cannot last forever." A third added, "A wounded heart can be hidden, but a threatened throne cannot." The words landed like stones, but Chidibere's face remained still. Silence had become his only armor. When the meeting ended, the elders filed out one after another, leaving the prince alone in the hall. Only Captain Ikenaduru, his loyal friend and head of palace security, remained. "You should rest, my prince," Ikena said softly. Chidibere gave a bitter smile. Rest? In this palace? He walked toward the entrance and stopped beneath the carved archway. Servants crossed the courtyard below with brass bowls and baskets. Guards stood alert. Everything looked ordered. Only he knew how broken he felt beneath the title everyone admired. "What becomes of a man?" he asked quietly. "When the world sees a crown, but he feels empty inside." Ikena had no answer. In her private chamber, Queen Mother Neka Nwokeanyi sat upright as a maid adjusted the coral beads on her wrist. Her expression was calm, but her thoughts were sharp. A throne without an heir invited whispers. Whispers invited weakness. When she heard the council had ended badly, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them with a cold resolve. "Send word to the Eze family," she ordered, "and make sure no one outside these walls hears what should remain buried." But secrets in Umadiri rarely stayed buried. Beyond the palace, in the humble Amankwo hamlet, a young village cook named Adaora Okafor was beginning another ordinary day, unaware that her quiet life was already moving toward the pain of a prince, the burden of a kingdom, and a love that would challenge everything tradition had built. Far from the guarded silence of Obi Umadiri, life in Amankwo hamlet began before the sun fully rose. Roosters crowed across the red earth paths. Smoke lifted from clay kitchens, and women swept their compounds with short brooms made from dry palm ribs. In one of the smallest compounds near the edge of the village, Adaora Okafor knelt beside a low hearth, stirring a pot with steady hands. The firelight danced across her face, soft but focused. Her wrapper was simple, her blouse faded from many washings, but there was dignity in the way she moved. Nothing about her was careless. Beside her, baskets of cocoyam, scent leaves, dry fish, and peppers lay neatly arranged. She treated food with respect, as though every meal deserved the honor, no matter how poor the home it came from. From inside the huts, her father's voice called out, "Adaora, is this soup for humans or for spirits? The aroma alone has entered my dreams." She smiled despite herself. "Papa, if you spent half the energy you use praising food on repairing the goat fence, we would be rich by now." Pa Obiora Okafor emerged slowly, tying his wrapper around his waist. Age and hardship had bent him, but not broken his humor. He inhaled deeply and placed a hand on his chest. "My daughter, one day your cooking will enter a palace." Adaora laughed softly. "A palace? Let it first enter Eek Market without customers pricing it, as if I cooked with river water." Her father chuckled, but then his tone gentled. "Mock if you want, but what God hides in a person is not always seen from the outside." Adaora lowered her eyes. She had heard such encouragement many times, usually when money was low and hope was all they could afford. Since her mother died, she had become more than a daughter in that house. She was helper, provider, comfort, and strength. After serving her father, she packed portions of food carefully into clean bowls lined with banana leaves. Even in poverty, Adaora believed presentation mattered. Food should carry care, not desperation. By mid-morning, she walked toward Eek Market Square, balancing a tray with practiced grace. The market was alive with noise, women calling out prices, children chasing one another between stalls, traders arguing over peppers and palm oil. But beneath the normal bustle, another thing moved just as quickly. Gossip. Two women near a kola nut stall lowered their voices as Adaora passed. "They say the prince still has no wife." "Not just no wife," the other whispered. "They say the problem is deeper than that." Adaora kept walking, but the words brushed against her thoughts. News from the palace always reached the market broken into whispers and shaped by rumor. She disliked such talk. Trouble sounded larger when carried in idle mouths. At her small spot near the edge of the square, she arranged her bowls and began serving customers. Before long, a well-dressed palace maid stopped in front of her stand, drawn by the rich aroma rising from the pot. "Who made this Afeon Nubu?" the maid asked. "I did," Adaora replied politely. The woman studied her, then dipped a spoon into a sample and tasted it. Her eyes widened for the briefest moment. "This is yours?" Adaora nodded. The maid set the spoon down carefully. "Prepare a fresh portion tomorrow morning, better than this one." Adaora blinked. "For your household?" The woman gave a small, unreadable smile. "For somewhere that matters." Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Adaora stood still for a moment, confused. She did not know that the woman was Mama Irena's assistant from the royal kitchen. She did not know that before the next day ended, a meal from her hands would cross the gates of Obi Umadiri. And she certainly did not know that somewhere inside that palace lived a man too wounded to hope, yet already being led toward her by something greater than chance. The next morning, Adaora woke before dawn. The request from the strange palace maid had stayed with her through the night. She did not know who the food was for, but something about the woman's tone told her this was no ordinary order. So she cooked with even greater care. She washed the bitter leaves until their sharpness softened, ground fresh pepper by hand, seasoned the stock slowly, and let the soup settle into a rich, balanced aroma that filled their little compound. Beside it, she prepared soft, pounded yam, smooth and warm, wrapped neatly for delivery. Pa Obiora watched her with amused eyes. "This one you are cooking as if the ancestors themselves booked a table?" Adaora smiled faintly. "Whoever pays for food deserves good food." Her father shook his head. "No, whoever cooks like this is not preparing only for money." She ignored him, but his words lingered. By sunrise, the same palace maid returned, this time with a small woven basket and a firmer manner. She inspected the food, nodded once, and handed Adaora a few coins in advance. "If this pleases them, there may be more work." Adaora accepted the payment with both hands. "Thank you." The maid lifted the basket and left without another word. Hours later, inside Obi Umwadiri, the royal kitchen moved in disciplined tension. Pots simmered, maids hurried, and Mama Urena supervised every tray with sharp eyes. She had agreed to test the village girl's cooking only because the prince had recently rejected meal after meal, pushing away food with the same cold indifference he used to keep the world at a distance. When the tray was finally arranged, a servant carried it to Prince Chidibere's private chamber. He sat near an open, carved window, dressed simply in a dark tunic, staring into the courtyard below without seeing it. Since the council meeting, his silence had grown heavier. Even the sound of birds in the palace gardens seemed too cheerful for the weight inside him. The servant bowed and placed the meal before him. "My prince, your breakfast." Chidibere barely looked at it. "Leave it." The servant hesitated. "Mama Urena said this one is different." At that, Chidibere's gaze shifted. The aroma rising from the bowl was unfamiliar in the best way, earthy, warm, careful. Like a memory he could not immediately place. Slowly he reached for the spoon. The first taste stopped him. Not because it was extravagant, not because it tasted royal, but because it tasted honest. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he took another spoonful, and another. The servant, still standing at a respectful distance, tried to hide his surprise as the prince, who had barely eaten properly in weeks, finished the meal in silence. At last, Chidibere set the bowl down. "Who made this?" The servant blinked. "My prince?" "The food," Chidibere said, his voice quieter now. "Who cooked it?" The servant bowed lower. "It came through the kitchen, Your Highness. I will ask." Chidibere turned his face toward the window again, but something inside him had shifted. It was small, almost too small to name. Yet for the first time in many months, something had reached him without pressure, without pity, without reminding him of his failure. Just food. But it had entered the emptiness like light entering a closed room. In the royal kitchen, the message returned quickly. Mama Urena lifted a brow when she heard it. "The prince asked for the cook?" The servant nodded. "Yes." Mama Urena said nothing for a moment. Then she looked toward the outer courtyard where the world beyond the palace walls began. Somewhere out there was the village girl. And without knowing it, Adaora Okafor had just done what healers, elders, and nobles had failed to do. She had stirred the attention of a wounded prince. That evening, the air in Obi Umwadiri was cooler, touched by the hush that came just before night fully settled over the palace. Lamps were being lit along the corridors when Prince Chidibere stepped into the royal kitchen for the first time in many weeks. His arrival froze the room. Maids lowered their eyes. Servants straightened quickly. Even Mama Urena, who was not easily unsettled, paused in the middle of giving instructions. "My prince," she said with a bow. "If we had known you were coming—" "I came to ask a question," Chidibere said. His tone was calm, but the room felt suddenly smaller under the weight of his presence. "This morning's meal, who prepared it?" Mama Urena studied him carefully. "The soup and pounded yam?" Yes, it did not come from my regular kitchen hands, she admitted. A girl from Amanco Hamlet made it. One of my assistants found her in Eek Market Square. Chitty Bear's face did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. What is her name? Adaora, Mama Urena said. Adaora Okafor. He repeated it inwardly as though testing how the name felt in silence. Adaora, a simple name. Soft, steady, like the meal itself. Mama Urena wiped her hands on a clean cloth. If it pleases your highness, I can ask her to prepare another. Chitty Bear nodded once. Do that. Nothing more. He turned and left. But the kitchen remained still even after he was gone. Mama Urena narrowed her eyes in thought. Princes did not ask for village girls by name over one meal. Something about this was unusual. The next morning in Amanco Hamlet, Adaora was sorting fresh vegetables when the same palace maid returned, this time with more urgency. You are to prepare another meal. Adaora stood. For the same household? The woman gave her a look. Do not ask too many questions. Just cook. Pa Obiora, seated under the mango tree, muttered as the maid walked off. People who speak as if they swallowed hot charcoal are always close to power. Adaora nearly laughed, but worry pressed at her chest. A second order meant the first had truly pleased them. She should have felt only gratitude. Instead, she felt the unease that often came when poor people found themselves unexpectedly noticed by the wealthy. Still, she cooked. This time, she prepared white rice with a rich sauce of chicken and peppers, balanced with enough spice to warm but not overpower. She added steamed vegetables on the side, carefully arranged. She did not know who the food was for, but she plated it with the same quiet dignity as always. At the palace, Chitty Bear waited longer than he admitted to himself. When the tray arrived, he dismissed the servant before tasting it. Again, the first bite held that same strange sincerity. No excess, no performance. Just skill, care, and restraint. For the first time in a long while, he ate slowly. Not out of duty, but because he wanted to. Later that afternoon, as he crossed the inner courtyard, he encountered Queen Mother Neka. One glance at her son told her something had shifted, though she could not yet name it. You seem lighter today, she said. Chitty Bear answered carefully. It was a quiet day. In this palace, quiet things often hide important movements, she replied. He met her gaze but said nothing. That night, while the moon spread pale light over the palace walls, Chitty Bear stood alone by his chamber window and repeated the name once more in his mind. Adaora Okafor. He did not understand why it mattered that he now knew it. He only knew that, after months of feeling numb, something human had reached him from beyond the polished walls of royalty. Not a healer, not an elder, not a noble bride, a village girl he had never met. And somewhere in Amanco Hamlet, Adaora lay awake too, unsettled by the thought that someone from somewhere that matters had now asked for her food twice. Neither of them knew it yet, but a bridge had begun to form between red earth and royal stone, and once such bridges are built by fate, they are rarely easy to break. By the third request, even Mama Urena knew this was no longer ordinary. The prince had never been a man to speak much about food. He ate what was placed before him or ignored it altogether, but now he was asking quiet questions. Was the cook punctual? Could she prepare something lighter in the evening? Did she always cook with so much balance? Mama Urena answered carefully, though curiosity had begun to prick at her. On the fourth morning, she sent word to Amanco Hamlet with a new instruction. The girl is to come herself. When Adaora heard it, her hands stilled over the basket she was packing. Come? Where? The palace maid looked almost amused by her fear. To Obi Umodiri, the royal kitchen wants to see how you prepare the meals. Pa Obiora rose at once. My daughter is a cook, not a goat being dragged to a market inspection. Papa, Adaora said softly, though her own heart had started to race. The maid folded her arms. If she does not come, they will find another person. After the woman left, silence sat in the compound for a while. Then Pa Obiora sighed and looked at his daughter. Go, he said at last, but go with your dignity tied firmly around your waist. In places of power, the poor must remember who they are, or others will tell them. Adaora nodded. She wore her cleanest blouse, a neatly wrapped fabric around her waist, and a simple scarf over her hair. She carried no jewelry, no perfume, no pride she could not defend, only herself. The palace was even larger up close than it appeared from afar. Its carved gates, broad courtyards, and guarded walkways made her feel both small and watched. As she followed the maid through the service passage, Adaora kept her eyes low, taking in only glimpses of polished floors, bronze lamps, and stern-faced guards. In the royal kitchen, Mama Urena received her with a long, measuring look. So you are Adaora? Yes, Mama. You cook well. Thank you. Mama Urena gestured toward the ingredients laid out on a wide wooden table. Then cook. Adaora tied her wrapper more firmly and began. At first, the kitchen staff watched her with hidden amusement, expecting village nervousness to ruin her rhythm. But Adaora moved with quiet confidence. She washed, chopped, seasoned, and stirred with the ease of someone who respected food too deeply to fear an audience. She wasted nothing. She rushed nothing. Even Mama Urena's expression softened. From the corridor beyond the kitchen door, unseen by most of the staff, Prince Chidi Bear stood still. He had not planned to stop. Yet when he heard she had arrived, something pulled him there. Through the half-open doorway, he saw her for the first time. Not dressed like a palace woman, not adorned like the noble daughters he had always known, just a young woman with clear eyes, dark, radiant skin, and a quiet steadiness in the way she worked. There was no performance in her, no attempt to impress. She carried herself with the calm of someone who had learned that survival itself was work. For a moment he did not move. Then Adaora turned slightly, reaching for a bowl, and though she did not fully face the doorway, something in him tightened. Not with discomfort this time, but with recognition he could not explain. This was the woman behind the warmth that had crossed his walls. As if sensing a presence, Adaora glanced up. Her eyes met his, only for a second. But in that second, the spoon slipped slightly in her hand. The room seemed to narrow. She did not know him personally, yet she knew at once who he was. His bearing announced it before his clothes did. The silence around him made it undeniable. The Crown Prince. Adaora quickly lowered her gaze and bowed her head. Chidi Bear said nothing. He only held her gaze long enough to see surprise, modesty, and something else he had not seen directed at him in a long time. No fear mixed with ambition, no eager calculation, no practiced charm. Just human uncertainty. He stepped away before anyone could fully notice he had been there. But the moment remained. And by the time Adaora left the palace that day, carrying home her payment, beneath the setting sun, she knew one thing with certainty. The food she had been preparing was not for some distant noble household. It had been reaching the table of the prince himself, and now, for the first time, his eyes had reached her too. After that day in the palace kitchen, Adaora told herself to return to normal life. She woke early, swept the compound, fetched water, cooked for her father, and carried herself as she always had. Yet nothing felt entirely ordinary anymore. Once the palace had been a distant place of stories and ceremonies. Now it had a face, a quiet, burdened face with eyes that had looked at her, not with pride, but with weariness. In Obi Umuadiri, Prince Chidibere also tried to resume his usual stillness. He sat through council briefings, listened to reports from elders, and endured his mother's carefully chosen words about duty and marriage. But beneath all of it, a small disruption had taken root. He found himself waiting for meals again, not with hunger alone, but with a strange calm he could not explain. By the end of the week, Mama Urena no longer needed direct instruction. Whenever a tray was prepared for the prince, Adaora's hand was the one most often requested. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes yam porridge, sometimes rice with scent leaves and peppered fish. Each dish arrived with the same quiet balance, as though the person who cooked it understood that gentleness could also be strength. One afternoon, after finishing work in the kitchen, Adaora was rinsing a brass bowl in the rear courtyard when a shadow fell across the stone. She turned quickly and froze. It was Prince Chidibere. He was dressed simply, without the heavy formal layers of court, yet there was no mistaking the royalty in the way he stood. Adaora lowered her gaze at once and bent respectfully. "My prince." For a brief moment he did not speak. It was as if he too was adjusting to the fact that this meeting was no longer through food, walls, or half-open doors. "You are Adaora Okafor," he said at last. "Yes, my prince. I have eaten your food many times now." Adaora kept her eyes lowered. "I am grateful it pleased your highness." "It did more than please me." The words made her lift her head slightly before remembering herself again. Chidibere noticed. A faint softness touched his face, so slight it almost disappeared before it formed. "You cook," he said, "as though you understand the person eating, even when you have not met them." Adaora swallowed. "In my father's house, we say food should not only fill the stomach, it should return peace to the body." For the first time in many months, something close to warmth moved through Chidibere's chest. "Return peace," he repeated quietly, as though the phrase had found a place inside him. Adaora worried she had spoken too boldly. "Forgive me if I spoke out of place, my prince." "You did not." The courtyard grew still. Somewhere beyond the wall, birds moved in the palace trees. From the main kitchen came the distant sound of pots and women's voices, but within that small space, the world seemed to slow. Chidibere looked at her more carefully now. Her beauty was not loud. It lived in the honesty of her face, the steadiness of her posture, the absence of pretense. She did not reach toward him with hidden ambition the way others often did. She simply stood there, respectful, human, and real. "What did your father teach you?" he asked. Adaora blinked, surprised by the question. "To work with clean hands, to speak with respect, and never to let poverty make me behave without dignity." Something in the answer struck him deeply. He gave a small nod. "He taught you well." Footsteps sounded from the corridor nearby. At once, Chidibere's face returned to its usual guarded calm. "You may go," he said. Adaora bowed again. "Yes, my prince." She walked away carefully, but once she reached the inner kitchen passage, her heart was beating hard against her chest. Back in the courtyard, Chidibere remained where he was for a moment longer. He had spoken only a few sentences, nothing improper, nothing careless. Yet the conversation stayed with him more strongly than entire evenings spent among nobles and elders. For the first time in a long while, silence no longer felt like a prison, because somewhere within it now lived a voice that spoke of peace, dignity, and home. And without either of them saying it aloud, a dangerous thing had begun. The prince was no longer only receiving Adaora's food. He was beginning to seek her presence. In the days that followed, the change in Prince Chitty Bear was too slight for strangers to name, but too clear for those who knew him well to ignore. He still attended council meetings. He still answered with restraint. He still carried the weight of the throne in his shoulders and the caution of a wounded man in his silence. But now, sometimes, after a meal prepared by Adaora, there was less darkness in his eyes. He no longer pushed away his food untouched. He no longer looked as though every hour inside the palace was a punishment. That small change was enough to awaken attention. The first to notice was Queen Mother Neka. One evening, as she sat with her son in the outer chamber of his wing, she watched him lift a cup of herbal tea with a calm she had not seen in months. "You seem less troubled these days," she said carefully. Chitty Bear did not look at her. "Do I?" "A mother sees what others miss." He gave no reply. Neka's gaze shifted to the tray on the table. "The kitchen tells me your appetite has returned. Some meals are easier to eat than others." There was nothing unusual in the words, yet instinct tightened inside her. In palaces, changes never happened without cause, and where cause was hidden, danger often followed. Later that same night, she sent for Mama Urena. When the kitchen head arrived and bowed, the Queen Mother wasted no time. "I hear my son has taken unusual interest in the meals from your kitchen." Mama Urena chose her words with care. "His Highness has recently preferred dishes prepared by a village girl assisting us." "A village girl?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Her name is Adaora Okafor. She is skilled, quiet, respectful." Queen Neka's face remained still, but her fingers tightened slightly over the coral beads in her hand. "How long has she been coming?" "A short while, Your Majesty." "See that it remains only kitchen work." Mama Urena lowered her head. "Yes, Your Majesty." The palace walls were never as disciplined as those who built them. Servants saw more than they were meant to. Maids carried fragments of truth in their mouths. Guards pretended not to listen, yet heard everything. By the next market day, whispers had already begun to float beyond the gates of Obi Umadiri. At Eek Market Square, two women buying smoked fish lowered their voices. "They say the prince now eats like a man who has remembered life. And they say the food comes from a girl in Amankwul." Another woman clicked her tongue. "Let her be careful. When poor people are noticed by the powerful, it is not always favor." Adaora heard none of this directly, but she felt the shift all the same. More palace errands now came through the kitchen. More eyes lingered on her than before. Some servants warmed to her. Others watched with thin smiles that carried no kindness. Then came the sharpest sign of all. As Adaora carried a tray through the inner passage one afternoon, a graceful woman in expensive fabric and coral jewelry stepped into her path. It was Lady Ifunanya Eze. Everything about her spoke of breeding, polish, and certainty. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her gaze moved from Adaora's face to the tray in her hands. "So," she said softly, "you are the one." Adaora lowered her eyes at once. "Good afternoon, my lady." Ifunanya took one slow step closer. A cook should remember the boundaries of the kitchen. Sometimes village girls mistake invitation for importance. Adaora held the tray carefully, though her fingers tightened beneath it. "I am only here to do my work." Ifunanya's smile was elegant and cold. "Then do it quietly." She stepped aside and walked on, leaving the scent of perfume and warning in the air. Adaora stood still for a moment before continuing. That evening, under the fading light in Amankwa hamlet, Pa Obiora noticed the silence in his daughter's face. "What has happened?" Adaora hesitated. Then she answered softly, "Papa, sometimes a person can enter a place with clean intentions and still be treated like trouble." Pa Obiora looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "My daughter, fire does not need to insult dry grass before it burns it. Be wise." And in the palace that night, while Chitty Bear stood alone by his window thinking of a quiet girl who brought peace where others brought pressure, the forces around them were already beginning to gather. Love had not yet spoken its name, but opposition had already opened its eyes. The more the palace watched them, the more careful Prince Chitty Bear became. He no longer lingered openly near the kitchen courtyard. He spoke to Adaora only when chance allowed, and silence could protect what neither of them had yet named. But restraint did not stop feeling. It only deepened it. One late afternoon, rain clouds gathered over Obi Umadiri, and the palace corridors grew dim beneath the weight of coming weather. Adaora had stayed behind after the evening meal to help Mama Rena's assistants clear the cooking area. By the time she finished, most of the servants had gone. As she stepped into the narrow covered passage leading toward the outer courtyard, thunder rolled in the distance. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Adaora!" She turned. Prince Chitty Bear stood a few steps away, dressed in a simple dark tunic, his face shadowed by the fading light. For a brief second she forgot to breathe. "My prince, walk with me," he said quietly. It was not a command, it was almost a request. He led her through a quiet side path toward the old river path, where the palace walls gave way to trees and damp red earth. The air smelled of rain and leaves. For a while neither of them spoke. At last, Chitty Bear stopped. "When you are near," he said, still facing ahead, "my mind becomes quieter." Adaora's heart tightened. "My prince," he let out a faint breath, "everyone in this palace speaks to me of duty, of heirs, of expectation, of what a prince must prove. You are the only person who has offered me peace without demanding anything in return." Adaora lowered her gaze. "Peace is a gift from God, my prince. I only cook." He turned then, and there was no royal distance in his eyes now, only a tired honesty. "No," he said. "You do more than that." Rain began to fall lightly through the trees, soft at first. Adaora held her breath. She had felt his sorrow from the beginning, but now it stood close enough to touch. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked gently. For a moment Chitty Bear said nothing. Then he spoke with the quiet pain of a man opening a wound he had hidden too long. "Because I am tired of being seen as whole when I am not." Adaora looked up slowly. His voice dropped lower. "The whispers you hear in the market, they are not empty gossip. There is truth beneath them." The rain thickened, tapping softly against leaves and earth. "My body has failed me," he said. "The throne waits for an heir I have not been able to give. Elders advise, healers promise. My mother plans. But inside myself I have lived as a man carrying shame beneath a crown." Adaora felt tears sting her eyes before she could stop them. Not from pity, but from the rawness of his truth. So this was the hidden burden that had hollowed his silence. "My prince," she whispered. He looked away, ashamed of his own confession. "Now you know. If you wish to step back from me, do so. It would be wiser." But Adaora did not move. Instead, after a trembling moment, she spoke with the quiet strength that had always lived in her. "A wound does not stop a man from being a man," she said. "And pain does not remove the value God placed in a life." Chitty Bear turned back to her, startled. "You speak as if this burden is small." "It is not small," Adaora said. but it is not all that you are." The words entered him more deeply than any remedy ever had. For the first time since his secret had become a prison, someone had looked at the truth and still remained. The rain now fell in earnest, but neither of them moved. Between them stood no cure, no promise, no solution, only something more powerful: understanding. And that night, under the storm-dark sky of Umodiri, the bond between a wounded prince and a poor palace cook crossed into dangerous ground. Because once a woman has seen a man's deepest shame and answered it with dignity instead of disgust, love is no longer far behind. After the evening by the river path, nothing between Chitty Bear and Adaora could return to innocence. No vow had been spoken. No touch had crossed the careful line they both still respected. Yet something deeper than spoken romance now lived between them. Adaora had seen the wound beneath the prince's silence, and instead of shrinking from it, she had answered with compassion. From that moment, Chitty Bear no longer felt alone inside his own life. But peace rarely remains hidden for long in a palace. In the days that followed, Chitty Bear's change became impossible to miss. He carried less heaviness in his face. He no longer seemed like a man moving through duty by force alone. Even his voice, though still measured, had regained some warmth. To others, this should have been good news. Instead, it became a cause for alarm. Queen Mother Neka noticed first. Relief touched her only briefly before suspicion replaced it. Her son's spirit had shifted, yet not because of the alliance she had carefully guarded with the Eza family. Not because of any healer, elder, or royal arrangement. Something else was reaching him, and she intended to find out what. That same week, Lady Ifunanya Eze arrived at the palace in full elegance, wrapped in expensive fabric and quiet entitlement. She came under the familiar excuse of discussing marriage preparation with the Queen Mother, but her true purpose was sharper. She wanted to see for herself what or who had changed the prince. She found her answer sooner than expected. From the upper corridor overlooking the rear courtyard, Ifunanya paused when she saw Adaora below, handing a covered food bowl to a servant. At that same moment, Chitty Bear entered the opposite side of the passage and stopped. It was only a glance he gave Adaora, only the briefest pause, but it was enough. Too soft to be accidental, too aware to be ordinary. Ifunanya's expression did not crack, but something dark settled behind her eyes. Later, in Queen Mother Neka's chamber, she spoke carefully. "Your Majesty," she said, "forgive me if I overstep, but there is a village girl in your kitchen whose presence seems to carry more weight than her station should allow." Neka's gaze sharpened. "Her name is Adaora, so you know of her. A Queen Mother knows what enters her palace." Ifunanya lowered her voice. "Then you also know that kindness from below can become ambition if not checked." The words hung in the air. Neka did not answer immediately, but silence itself confirmed enough. The danger was no longer invisible. Meanwhile, in Amanquo hamlet, Adaora felt the pressure growing around her. Servants had become less warm. Some watched her with open resentment, others with mocking curiosity. Even Mama Urena, though not unkind, had begun speaking in shorter tones, as though distance might protect them both. That evening, Pa Obiora listened as his daughter spoke in fragments about tension in the palace. He was quiet for a long while before saying, "When the high places begin to notice the poor too closely, my daughter, it is never only the poor who are in danger. Sometimes truth itself is." Adaora looked down at her hands. "I did not go there looking for trouble, Papa." "I know," he said gently. "But trouble does not always wait to be invited." Back at the palace, Chitty Bear stood alone in his chamber, hearing the storm gathering around them before anyone had spoken it aloud. He knew his mother. He knew Ifunanya. He knew the hunger of tradition when threatened. For the first time, the comfort Adaora brought him was no longer only a refuge. It had become a battlefield. Because in Umuadiri, a prince might be allowed pain. He might even be forgiven weakness in secret. But to love a poor cook above the plans of the throne? That was the kind of choice kingdoms resisted with all their strength. The blow did not come through open accusation. In palaces, cruelty rarely arrived shouting. It came dressed in order, propriety, and calm voices that left no mark on the hand that delivered the wound. 3 days after Lady Ifunanya's visit, Adaora was summoned to Queen Mother Neka's private chamber. She entered with lowered eyes and respectful steps, her heart already uneasy. The room was cool, elegant, and severe, filled with carved wood, bronze lamps, and the quiet authority of a woman who had ruled from behind the throne for many years. Queen Mother Neka did not ask her to sit. "So," she said, her voice smooth and controlled, "you are Adaora Okafor." "Yes, Your Majesty." "I have heard that your cooking pleases my son." Adaora kept her gaze lowered. "I only do the work given to me." Neka rose slowly from her seat and came closer, studying her as though measuring a threat hidden inside simple fabric and modest silence. The poor often say that before they begin to want more. Adaora's fingers tightened around each other, but her voice remained steady. "I do not seek what is not mine, Your Majesty." "No?" Neka asked softly. "Then let me help you understand what is yours and what is not." The words landed with quiet force. "My son is the future of Umuadiri. His life is not a marketplace where every passing hand may touch what it likes. He belongs to the throne, to lineage, to history. Girls from mud compounds may bring food to a palace, but they do not rise with it." Adaora felt the sting of the insult, but she held herself still. "I have shown respect in all things, Your Majesty." "Respect," Neka said, "would have kept distance." Silence filled the room. Then the Queen Mother gave the order that had already been decided before Adaora entered. "From today you will no longer serve in the inner palace kitchen. You will collect your wages and return to Amangu. If the palace requires food from your hands, it will be requested through others. You will not place yourself where you can be mistaken for more than a servant." Adaora lifted her eyes then, pain flickering through them before she could hide it. "Your Majesty, if I have done wrong, tell me my offense." For the first time, Neka's expression hardened fully. "Your offense is forgetting your place." The words cut deeper than a slap. Adaora bowed her head again, but tears burned behind her eyes. She would not let them fall there. Not before this woman. Not in that room. "As you command, Your Majesty." When she stepped out of the chamber, the corridor felt colder than before. Each step back toward the kitchen seemed heavier than the last. By the time she reached the service passage, Mama Orena had already heard. She looked at Adaora with pity she did not dare speak aloud. "Take your things," she said quietly. "Do not argue. It will only worsen it." Adaora nodded. Word moved fast. Some servants looked away in discomfort. Others pretended surprise. A few watched with the satisfaction of people who prefer the world when it stays cruel and familiar. As Adaora crossed the outer courtyard for the last time that day, carrying the small bundle of her belongings, fate dealt a sharper wound. Lady Ifunanya Eze stood beneath the archway ahead. She took in the bundle, the lowered face, the silent humiliation, and smiled with polished cruelty. "Now the palace breathes correctly again," she said. Adaora stopped but did not answer. Ifunanya stepped closer. "This is how such stories end. A servant remembers she is a servant. A prince remembers he is a prince." Still Adaora said nothing. Not because she had no pain, but because dignity was all she had left to protect. She walked past. By sunset, she had returned to Amanquo hamlet. Pa Obiora saw her face before she spoke and understood enough. He said nothing at first, only took the bundle from her hands and placed it inside. Then he turned back and looked at his daughter with sorrow and anger fighting in his old eyes. "And they have wounded you." Adaora swallowed hard. "They reminded me I am poor." Pa Obiora's voice grew low. "No. They reminded themselves that wealth without mercy is poverty of the soul." That same evening in the palace, Chitty Bear learned she had been removed. The calm he had carried for weeks shattered at once, and for the first time in a very long while the wounded prince was no longer only hurting. He was angry. When Prince Chitty Bear heard that Adaora had been dismissed from the inner palace, something in him hardened. He did not ask for details at first. He did not need them. He knew his mother's methods, the polished cruelty of Lady Ifunanya, and the silent obedience fear imposed on palace servants. But knowing was not the same as accepting. That evening he went straight to Queen Mother Neka's chamber. She was seated near a bronze lamp reviewing ceremonial fabrics, with the same calm she wore even when arranging other people's pain. She looked up as her son entered, and though her face remained composed, she saw at once that this was not a visit of courtesy. "You sent her away," Chitty Bear said. Neka set the fabric aside. "I corrected an imbalance. She did nothing wrong. She forgot the distance between a kitchen and a throne." Chitty Bear stepped closer, his voice low but burning beneath control. "No. She was punished because she gave me peace, where your plans have given me pressure." Neka rose to meet him fully. "Peace?" she repeated. "Is that what you call this? A prince of Umwadiri growing attached to a village cook while the kingdom waits for stability? She is more honorable than many who wear silk in this palace." The words landed like a challenge. For the first time, anger flashed openly across the Queen Mother's face. "Honor does not make a queen. Bloodline matters. Alliances matter. The future of this kingdom matters." "And does my life matter?" Chitty Bear asked. She fell silent. He held her gaze. "All of you speak of heirs, of lineage, of what I owe Umwadiri. But none of you ask what has been left of me beneath that burden. Adaora did not come to take from me. She came with clean hands, and you repaid her with humiliation." Neka's voice dropped, colder now. "A ruler cannot build his future on emotion." Chitty Bear answered, with a steadiness stronger than anger. "Then perhaps the throne has misunderstood what makes a kingdom worth saving." Without waiting for dismissal, he turned and left. Before dawn the next morning, he was already on horseback with Captain Ikenna riding beyond the palace toward Amanquo hamlet. By the time they arrived, the village was only beginning to stir. Smoke rose from early morning fires. Dogs barked. A few women paused mid-sweep, shocked to see the crown prince enter such a humble place. In front of the Okafor compound, Pa Obiora stepped out first, startled but unbending. "My prince." Chitty Bear bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect rare enough to silence even the watching neighbors. "I have come for Adaora." Those words ran through the hamlet faster than wind. Adaora emerged slowly from the hut, her face calm but shadowed by the hurt she had carried home. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The contrast between them seemed almost too sharp to hold. He in royal authority, she in simple village cloth, both standing before a crowd that could already feel history shifting. At last, Chitty Bear spoke. "What was done to you in my palace was wrong." Adaora lowered her eyes. "My prince, some wrongs are considered normal when done to the poor." "Not this one," he said. Pa Obiora studied him carefully. "Words are light, your highness. Thrones are heavy." Chitty Bear turned to the old man. Then let me speak with the weight of what I mean. I did not come here out of pity. I came because your daughter has shown me more truth, dignity, and mercy than I have received in many places built with power. The old man's gaze softened, though only slightly. Then Chitty Bear looked back at Adaora. His voice was quieter now, but more exposed than it had ever been. You saw my deepest shame and did not turn away. You brought peace into a life that had forgotten it. Since you left, these palace walls have felt empty again. I know what stands against us. I know what the kingdom will say, but I will not hide behind silence any longer. Adaora's breath trembled. In front of the gathered villagers, the Prince of Muad'Dib laid down the first true act of courage his love required. Not secrecy, not longing, but choice. And once a prince chooses truth before witnesses, the kingdom can no longer pretend not to hear it. News of the prince's visit to Amanquo hamlet spread through Muad'Dib before midday. By evening, what began as whispers had become open discussion in Eek Market Square, in the servants' quarters, and even among the elders. The crown prince had gone himself to the home of a poor cook, not in secret, not in shame, openly. By the next day, Ndi-Ichi Council Hall was filled again. The elders sat in grave silence. Queen Mother Nneka stood with controlled dignity. Lady Ifunanya Eze sat rigid, with disbelief hidden beneath poise. At the center stood Prince Chitty Bear, no longer carrying the stillness of a man hiding from his own life. Ichie Madubagu spoke first. Your Highness, the kingdom is disturbed. We hear troubling reports. Tell us they are exaggerated. Chitty Bear lifted his head. They are not exaggerated. A murmur moved through the hall. He continued, his voice calm and clear. For too long, this palace has treated my life as if it belonged only to duty, alliance, and fear. You spoke of my future without asking whether I still possessed the strength to live it. You guarded the throne, but not the man beneath the crown. Queen Mother Nneka's face tightened. This is not the place for rebellion. No, Chitty Bear replied. It is the place for truth. He turned to the elders. Yes, I have carried a private wound. Yes, the burden of succession has nearly broken me. But the woman you dismiss as unworthy brought me more healing than all the pressure that has surrounded me. Adaora Okafor did not manipulate me. She did not chase the palace. She came with dignity, clean labor, and a heart without greed. If such a woman is unfit because she is poor, then perhaps our measure of worth has been corrupt. The hall fell silent. Lady Ifunanya rose then, graceful but cold. And will affection now replace order? Will a prince cast aside alliance, history, and royal discipline because a cook made him comfortable? Chitty Bear met her gaze. No, I will cast aside falsehood because it has poisoned this palace long enough. Those words ended it. By sunset, the palace courtyard was filled with elders, titled families, servants, and villagers who had gathered at the edges to witness what none of them had imagined they would see. Adaora stood near the entrance, dressed simply but neatly, her face calm though her heart trembled. Beside her stood Pa Obiora, overwhelmed yet steady. Across from them, before the people of Muad'Dib, stood Prince Chitty Bear. He stepped forward and spoke so all could hear. I was taught that a crown must protect dignity. Today I begin by protecting hers. Adaora Okafor is not a stain on this palace. She is a woman of honor. And before this kingdom, I choose not the loudest alliance, but the truest heart. The courtyard erupted in gasps, murmurs, resistance, and awe. Queen Mother Nneka closed her eyes for one long moment. When she opened them, the battle in her face had changed. She still feared the scandal, still feared what tradition might lose. But for the first time, she also saw what her son had become by standing there, not weaker, but freer. Adora's eyes filled with tears, but she did not break. She simply bowed her head, carrying the weight of the moment with the same dignity that had brought her there. And in that public choice, something greater than romance was born. The wounded prince who had once hidden beneath shame became a man willing to stand in truth. The poor cook, once told to remember her place, became the woman no one could erase. And Umuadiri learned that sometimes the future of a kingdom is not saved by pride, but by mercy. Because in the end, the throne did not heal the man. Love did,